The 20th century was one of the most expansive periods in music history, particularly for America. Aaron Copland forges a distinctive voice for American classical music. Meanwhile, Charles Strauss and Leonard Bernstein create gold standards of musical theatre. Philip Glass trailblazes the minimalist movement, creating gorgeous works that would influence music for decades. Quincy Jones produces game-changing albums, helping to significantly shape the journey of pop music. Meanwhile, in performance, conductors such as John Elliott Gardner create extraordinary recordings which make ancient music fashionable again. And in education, folks like Bernstein and Walter Piston produce material which is still studied today by thousands of music students all around the globe. And the list could go on and on, but hold on. All of these musicians, at some point or another, were students of the same teacher, Nadia Boulanger. So in this video, I want to tell you about Nadia Boulanger, a woman of incredible achievement and one of the most extraordinary behind-the-scenes figures in classical music history. This video was assisted by my new podcast, A Composer's Journey, where every week we give you a piece of actionable advice which you can use to write more music and write better music. You can check it out in the description and make sure to join the list for once per week exclusive bonus content for composers and composing fanatics. So originally I'd wanted to make a video about both the Boulanger sisters, Lily and Nadia, but the more I studied them, the more I became fascinated with their lives. Both were incredible and prodigious musicians, and both had a very significant part to play in the history of Western music. I have to say, Lily's story is every bit as extraordinary as Nadia's, and while Nadia wrote some gorgeous music, Lily is on another level altogether. So look out for my next video, Why Listen to Lily Boulanger. But this video is going to focus on the astonishing work of Lily's older sister, Nadia, arguably one of the greatest music teachers to have ever existed, the lady who launched 1,000 musicians. Nadia Boulanger grew up in Paris as part of a very musical family. Family friends included the composers Charles Gounod and Gabriel Fauré. She says that she hated music as a child, until at the age of 5 she heard a fire bell and ran to reproduce its tone on the piano. From that moment, she was hooked. Her family was heavily involved with the Paris Conservatoire. Her parents and grandparents had taught there. And what you have to understand about the Paris Conservatoire is that it had very strict rules of progression. For example, in order to get into the composition class, you first had to pass a strict harmony class. If you then wanted to move from strict composition into free composition, you then had to pass a counterpoint and fugue test. This means that students had to take a rigorous study in theory for years if they wanted the chance to actually study composition. But Nadia was very prodigious. In 1897, at the age of 9 or 10, she won 3rd place in the solfège exams, but she was by far the youngest of the 55 women who took that test. The year after this, she won 1st prize in solfège. She started taking Ducas's piano lessons in 1900, aged 12 or 13. Yes, that's the same Ducas who wrote The Sorcerer's Apprentice. It's around this time that she wrote her first known song, aged around 13 or 14, called Extase, or Ecstasy. You can already hear a great musical maturity with beautiful piano textures and a lovely climax. In 1903, she won the 1st prize in harmony at the Conservatoire, and in 1904 she won 1st prize in organ, fugue, and piano accompaniment. This is all before her 17th birthday. That year, she also joined Gabriel Fauré's composing class. Yes, this is the Fauré of Requiem fame. We can hear a song she wrote at around 18 years old. Écoutez la chanson bien douce. Listen to the truly soft song. It's gorgeous. There are amazing moments all around, and it instantly fits into the French art song repertoire. This song was her first published work. But the main goal of of any composing student in the Paris Conservatoire was the prestigious Prix de Rome. For musicians, this was an intense composing competition, and the winner was almost guaranteed a successful career writing for opera. Previous winners of the Prix de Rome include Hector Berlioz, Charles Gounod, Ernest Boulanger, that's Nadia's father, Georges Bizet, Claude Debussy, Gustave Charpentier, and so on. It should really go without saying that this competition was a big deal. It was often the end goal for composers at the Conservatoire. To qualify, competitors first had to compose a cantata for chorus to a set text, and that cantata needed to include a vocal fugue to a subject that would be written by one of the professors. A fugue is a very complex composition technique, which I explain in a lot more detail in my video on fugues. Then, finalists would be sent to a villa where they would have 2 weeks to compose another longer cantata for orchestra and soloists. They would compose in complete isolation. Competitors wouldn't even have a piano, just a pencil and paper, and they would only interact with each other during meal times. Because this format was so predictable, it meant that composers could practice before the event, composing cantatas to previous set texts and so on. Nadia Boulanger decided to prepare for this with a new teacher, Widor, in 1907. Yes, that's Widor of toccata fame. And so, in 1907, she made her first attempt at the competition. She reached the final round, but she failed to win a prize. The next year was a little more dramatic. For the first round, they were given a very complex fugue subject for their vocal fugue. Nadia decided that this subject would work better for instruments rather than voices, and so, breaking all of the rules, she wrote her fugue for the orchestra and no voices. The amazing thing is, in spite of breaking the rules, she actually passed through to the final round, though this completely outraged many people, including Camille Saint-Saëns. Yes, that's Saint-Saëns of Organ Symphony fame, or The Swan. The trouble is, because of this, she became known as a student who bent the rules, which is kind of ironic because she would never have let one of her own students behave like this in a competition. In any case, she entered the Prix de Rome 4 consecutive times in total, but she never won first prize. This was quite possibly, at least partially, due to institutional sexism, and many argue that she paved the way for her sister to win the competition a few years later. There's also some evidence to suggest that, at least for one of the years of entry, she was unable to finish writing her final submission piece. However, after these failures, she did continue writing music, at least for a while longer. You can hear the desolation, darkness, and futility in her work Heure Terne. Or a more beautiful side in her cantique. This cantique was later turned into a Luxaturna to commemorate her younger sister's death. Her 3 pieces for cello are a fantastic set. There's a gorgeous first movement, and the third movement is very fun and active. But her largest project was an opera she set out to compose in collaboration with her friend and mentor, the composer Raoul Pugnot. Pugnot had been immensely helpful in Nadia's early career. It was Pugnot who managed to secure many performances of Nadia's music, and who often performed with her, toured with her, and publicly promoted her work. The trouble is, this relationship led to many rumors of an illicit sexual relationship between the two, which of course was much more frowned upon then than it is now, and really had the potential to ruin Nadia's reputation. The other trouble is that in their musical collaborations, it is genuinely difficult to see how much of it is Boulanger and how much of it is Pugnot. And for whatever reason, audiences always prefer the romantic idea of a sole author over collaborative efforts, so most of Nadia's music with Pugnot has been overlooked. Unfortunately, their opera was never to be performed. Pugnot died in 1914, and the First World War broke out soon afterwards. Many years later, in 1945, 1946, Leonard Bernstein wrote to Boulanger with an interest in conducting this opera. Nadia sent him the score, but Bernstein never performed it, nor did he return the score. After Pugnau's death, Nadia's composing output ground almost to a halt. Some believe that she was too self-critical and couldn't bear to hear her own music. Some also think that her failures in the Prix de Rome may have knocked her confidence, and others still think that without the support from Pugnau, which was significant in shaping her composing career, she was left alone. It is also worth saying that Nadia's younger sister, Lily, was extremely talented, and Nadia recognized that. She actually spent considerable time promoting Lily's music later in life. Again, I'll be saying a lot more about Lily in my next video, but Nadia clearly had a huge affection for her younger sister. She spent a lot of time in Lily's company, and so it must have hit her extremely hard when Lily died at the age of 24 in 1918. Nadia's last known work was composed in 1922, J'ai frappé, My Hand Has Knocked at Closed Doors. It could be read as a farewell to composition. The text expresses this feeling of failure. This song is another gem, short, concise and powerful in its emotional effect. But following this song, nothing more for the final 50 years of her life, or at least nothing more that we know of. Having said all this, Nadia isn't remembered so much as a composer, because her real influence in her lifetime was as a teacher. She became arguably the most renowned music teacher in the world, maybe ever. People would flock to study with her in Paris, and saying that you had studied with her was the equivalent of having gone to a Swiss finishing school. Remember also that Paris was the place to be for artists in the early 20th century. Think of figures like Pablo Picasso, Gertrude Stein, Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, James Joyce, T.S. Eliot, Cole Porter, Diaghilev and Stravinsky. Creatives, and particularly American creatives, felt it was almost a cultural rite of passage to spend significant time in Paris. So, students of Boulanger who visited her in Paris included Aaron Copland, Elliot Carter, Walter Piston, Philip Glass, Roy Harris, Burt Bacharach, Charles Strauss, Daniel Barenboim, John Eliot Gardner, Quincy Jones, Dino Lopati, Astor Piazzolla, Kathleen Ferrier, Virgil Thompson, Roger Sessions, and surely many more. Her students were fondly known as the Boulangerie, the French word for bakery. In her 30s, Nadia started teaching alongside Stravinsky. Yes, that's Stravinsky of Rite of Spring fame. She said she would sit at the piano and point out amazing moments of harmony to her students before looking to Stravinsky for approval. Stravinsky would simply shrug and say, "Well, that's tonal music for you." She later took up a prominent position at the Paris Conservatoire in 1946. However, she was most well known for her private tuition and for her directorship at the Conservatoire Américain at Fontainebleau, south of Paris. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about her teaching philosophy and some of her methods. I was fascinated to learn the philosophies of one of the greatest music teachers to have ever existed, so I thought that you might be too. The reason that so many Americans wanted to study with Madame Boulanger is partly because she was one of the first Europeans who really took American students seriously, and because she was able to give them the rigorous, hardcore training that American schools weren't providing at the time. Nadia would regret that American students lacked this solid basis of musical training, remarking, "Why is this the case? Because little children must not be tired." Tired students would receive little sympathy from Nadia. According to many sources, she hugely valued hard work and barely slept herself. She would teach from 8 in the morning until past midnight, 6 days a week. A former student writes that one might be summoned to a lesson at 10 p.m. It could last 1 hour, 2 hours, one would never know. She reportedly called sleep 5 hours of nothing, and she would attend mass, eat breakfast, and deal with all of her letters and correspondences before starting to teach at 8 a.m. Philip Glass says, "When I studied with her, the only way to live up to her standards and to turn out the amount of work she expected every week was to get up between 6 and 7 in the morning and work all day long. And if I did that every day, I would turn up at my lesson and Boulanger gave me the impression that I had done just about the very minimum. Similarly, David Conte says that one of Boulanger's great gifts was how hard she inspired you to work. I don't think I've ever worked harder in my life than that first summer at Fontainebleau. Glass says Boulanger set herself up as an incomparable model of discipline and dedication, and she expected you to be just like her. And that was almost impossible because she seemed beyond what any human being could really hope to be. Boulanger believed that the musical work should always be the center of attention, not the performer nor the commentator. Her teachings generally focused on what she considered to be the masterpieces of Western classical music. And like anyone, she did have her biases. She wouldn't teach Wagner and generally disapproved of Schoenberg's 12-tone methods. Having said this, she was fascinated by many strains of contemporary music. Copland writes about how she would obsessively study the rhythms, harmonies, and structures of jazz music. Her approaches towards analyzing and performing music were the same. Her main goal in either case was to project the structure of the piece. And for Nadia, the foundation of all music training was oral training. You needed to train an outstanding ear to qualify as a musician. While ear training was a priority, she would also teach score reading, counterpoint, harmony, figured bass, analysis, and more. However, her lessons certainly weren't pure theory. Philip Glass writes that with Boulanger, nothing was theoretical. It was all practical. The rules of harmony she could describe in a few sentences, but you could spend years writing it. Because to her, the difference between technique and theory was that technique is practice. Harmony is practice. Counterpoint is practice. Neither is theory. Conte writes that in his first summer he took solfege classes and keyboard harmony, where early on he would have to memorize a set of common cadences in all keys. In counterpoint studies, students would take a single cantus and write counterpoint for it 6 times, 3 times with the cantus in bass and 3 with it in soprano. If all this rigorous training weren't enough, Boulanger had a knack for pushing talented students well beyond their comfort zone. When Daniel Barenboim visited Boulanger at the age of 12, he was already a very talented pianist for his age. When he arrived, she handed him a copy of the Well-Tempered Clavier, which Barenboim already knew well. She turned the pages to the prelude in E minor from Book 1 and said, "Right, my boy, now play it for me in A minor." Barenboim had to read this piece of Bach and play it in a completely different key, and she would tap his fingers with a wooden ruler every time he played a wrong note. But this, Barenboim says, taught him to truly understand the harmonic relationships within music, a level of musical understanding much deeper than simply reading the notes. Another lesson of Nadia's was on setting limits in your composing. Quincy Jones remembers how she taught him,
"You don't have freedom in music until you have a total restriction. You restrict yourself and establish a periphery, and then you have freedom in music." And it's true, because if you can play anything you want, you play nothing.
Nadia also placed high value on training a musical memory. She reportedly knew all 48 preludes and fugues from Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier off by heart. And that's about 4.5 hours of complex keyboard music off by heart. Elliot Carter also recalls how, during a private composition lesson, she was able to play large swathes of Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring by heart. As she puts it, you are enriched by the music you know by heart. It becomes a part of you. But once she had given students this hardcore training in theory and oral skills, her greatest ambition was to encourage them to develop an individual musical voice. Quincy Jones says that she had a singular way of encouraging each student's own voice, even if they were not aware of what that voice might be. She encouraged composers to pursue their own interests and beliefs, whether it was Copland searching for an American classical voice or Charles Strauss pursuing musical theatre. She wouldn't ask them to subscribe to her belief system, but to follow their own beliefs and pursue their own uniqueness. But importantly, this would only come after a rigorous training in their musical heritage. In fact, the one student she is known to have turned away is George Gershwin. Why did she turn Gershwin away? Because she felt that he had already found his voice. voice and didn't need her tuition. Praise was rarely given by Nadia, and so it was highly prized. She certainly did have her favorites, and she would host at-homes. These are social events where her favorite students would join her after lessons for the opportunity to advance their careers and meet other major musicians in the area. Later on in her teaching career, she would host larger classes in her salon a few times a week. She strongly believed that singing through Bach cantatas was an imperative part of music education, and so, once per week, her group of students, the Boulangerie, would sing through a Bach cantata. The standard of singing in this group was so high that eventually they started performing professionally, and so Nadia Boulanger became one of the first professional female conductors. She developed a reputation for programming music from wildly different periods, and she believed that these different periods of music could say the same thing, only in different ways. In her words, the idea was to show that the past illuminates the present, but also that the present illuminates the past. The programs therefore create new links between them. And so Nadia became not only a well-known teacher, but a well-known performer. She was known as a public solo pianist, a well-reviewed organist. She performed works for 2 pianos alongside the great pianist Lipatti, and she also edited early music for publication, and even occasionally reviewed concerts. By the way, she was hugely significant in bringing about a revival of Monteverdi's music, and that's something that's often forgotten about her because her list of achievements is so huge. When she was in America, she conducted the premiere of Stravinsky's Dumbarton Oaks at Stravinsky's request. When she was in Britain, she conducted the British premiere of Fauré's Requiem. Despite all this incredible achievement, she was still sometimes subject to sexism. According to one account, when directing the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, at the first rehearsal, the instrumentalists not only ignored Nadia, they openly insulted her. While she tried to rehearse the orchestra, its concertmaster, Michel Plastro, fiddled a square dance tune. She stopped the orchestra and she said, "Gentlemen, this is beautiful music. Let us work together." The group were unused to being directed by a woman, and feeling suitably ashamed at the end of the rehearsal, they applauded Nadia. Yet, in spite of being an extraordinary role model in many respects, she was surprisingly anti-feminist, and her social views would certainly be controversial by today's standards. She valued aristocracy, and she placed high value on the traditional woman's role, feeling that the ultimate success for a woman was to become a wife and a mother. She generally disapproved of feminist campaigns, and she believed that the role of a woman was incompatible with the role of an artist. The reason I bring this up is because this attitude might point towards something interesting or rather sad about her own psyche. She felt that she had sacrificed her womanhood in order to serve art. She had no husband or children, and so by her standards she had failed in her role as a woman. But she had also not succeeded as a composer, and so by her standards she had failed in her role as an artist. Perhaps then, in spite of her immense success as a teacher, she saw herself as a failed woman and a failed artist. In any case, her impact as a teacher has remained legendary. Quincy Jones has said that he owed everything that he was as a musician to his early instruction under Nadia Boulanger. His favorite mantra of hers was,
"Your music will never be more or less than you are a human being."
As he puts it, Nadia Boulanger was the most astounding woman I ever met in my life. And as Aaron Copland has said, by a process of osmosis, one soaks up attitudes, principles, knowledge, reflections. Nadia Boulanger knew everything there was to know about music. It feels almost silly to say this after talking about Nadia Boulanger, but I've created a course designed to take you through reading, listening to, and writing music, right from the ground up. It's a course on practical music theory, and people have been getting really great results from it. I put a link to this course in the description, but if after this video you're feeling inspired to really work on your musical skills, then this could be a great place to start. So check it out in the description, and look out for my next video on the life and extraordinary music of Lily Boulanger, Nadia's younger sister.